Welcome to the VegasInsider.com Bet and Collect podcast.
I'm here to collect.
Hosted by Kevin Rogers.
Who's the big winner here tonight at the casino?
Your source for the best sports betting information to help you dominate your bookmaker.
Thought you was laying. I'm laying? No, I'm taking it. I was taking it.
It's time to bet and collect.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Bet and Collect podcast here on VegasInsider.com. I am Kevin Rogers, joined by Tony Mejia, as always, for Friday, June the 5th, and some good news. The NBA is coming back July 31st, and they're going to be in Orlando, and they're going to have 22 teams, play 8 regular season games each, and then start the playoffs. And to talk about all of this unfolding, Mike Wallace, who really is a friend of ours, you say friend of the show, friend of ours for a long time. He's covered the NBA for a very long time with the Miami Heat during the LeBron years, and now with the Memphis Grizzlies. He is the senior editor of Grind City Media. He's also on the Grizzlies broadcast as well, and he joins us here on the Bet and Collect podcast to talk about all of this with the NBA. Mike, it is good to talk to you again. I bet you are happy now that you know the NBA will be back in less than 2 months.
I am happy, man. It's happy has been a hard word to feel and to know and to experience in these tough times. And anything that I've done over the last couple of months, I've always started by saying, I wish peace and safety and recovery to the COVID-19, those who have tested positive, and the victims of it that we've lost. And I also say, hey, justice to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, as the country grapples with some of the issues that are out there in the streets today. Beyond that, yes, there is some relief. There's some excitement. There's some enthusiasm that we finally have some dates and see the timeline sort of come together officially from the league. And we're looking forward to it. It's going to be, I think it's much, much needed. And I think it's going to be something we all can sort of get our arms around.
Mike, do you like this format of the 22 teams, that 8 teams were eliminated and the West has 13 teams? The Grizzlies, a team that you cover, they're the 8th seed, so they're not in yet. They got to play their way in. But do you like the way that the NBA set up this format?
I do. I think it's respectful of what teams like the Grizzlies have been able to do so far this season. This is a team that, sort of caught a lot of people by surprise. Revamped front office, rookie point guard in Moran, rookie forward in Brandon Clark, young team, youngest rotation in the league for a long time this season. And then to go from being projected to win in the mid-20s to being a top 8 team in the West. This has been a season of development for these guys. Nobody really expected them to be here. Now this format gives them a chance to really finish what they started. 3.5 game lead with 8 to play, and you have to win by 4 in order to avoid the play-in. And if you get into the play-in, then guess what? You're going to be playing what amounts to a first-round type game with high implications anyway. So I think it's all going to be bonus for the Grizzlies at this point.
Have you talked to a few of the guys or the coaches about this particular setup where you are the 8th seed, but you're the hunted now? And how do they feel about that?
Well, they feel like, and I have talked to a lot of coaches and players just about every single day, and they feel, listen, this was the position that they were in March 11th when the season was stopped. I had just gotten off the plane with the team. We landed in Portland to play the Blazers on the 12th, and the season ended on the 11th, March 11th, because of the COVID. So they were going to be, it was a 3-game trip to play the Blazers, San Antonio, and Sacramento. And those are 3 teams that were bunched around the Grizzlies when you look at where they were in the standings anyway. So they expected to come down the stretch with the toughest schedule in the league. Now they get to resume it, playing probably the toughest schedule in the league to keep what they earned so far. And like I said, this is a playoff no matter what. You could say it's 8 regular season games, but for a team like the Grizzlies, it's 8 playoff games even before you get to the play-in round potentially.
The pause button allows Jaren Jackson Jr. to potentially get in the mix. What's going on with him?
It did. It allowed him to sort of get back from that knee sprain that he was dealing with. He had missed about 2 weeks. If memory serves me correct, that was 3 months ago now, man. It's kind of crazy how long. That's been an NBA offseason. So he gets to come back from that. He was on the verge of coming back that following week. Justice Winslow, who came from Miami in that trade, was dealing with a back issue that kept him out most of the season, was on the verge of playing against Portland on March 12th before the season was suspended. And then Brandon Clark was dealing with a quad injury, core quad type injury. And, he still needed some time before he was ready to come back. All three of those guys are in great shape right now. They're going to enter this restart training camp expecting to get back into the mix. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for the Grizzlies because they have some pieces that they weren't expecting to play at that point. Now they're available to play. And, oh, by the way, you still had a Josh Jackson who was coming into his own just as the season was going to be stopped at that point. So it's a lot of interesting ways that you can look at it.
Mike, I hate to phrase the question this way, but do you think it's fair the way they did things with the Grizzlies as the 8th seed, and it felt like they're trying to sneak in Zion and the Pelicans to get them an opportunity to be an 8 and maybe play LeBron and the Lakers in the first round? Do you see that as, I hate to say unfair for the Grizzlies, that they're the 8th seed when this whole thing was stopped, but or it is what it is?
Well, I was always a fan of going straight to the playoffs. I understand why you want to have some games to sort of get your legs under you and that kind of thing. I thought going straight to the playoffs was going to be able to shrink the amount of time teams needed to be quarantined and be in Orlando under that campus facility. But they chose to go expand it, give the teams that had a chance to make it another chance to make it. And that's fair. I can see that being fair. I think it also adds intrigue and some suspense to this 8-game regular season too. So you're not just playing meaningless games. Every single game is going to be meaningful and impactful. So, the Grizzlies did their work to put themselves in position to get the inside track, and they still have it right now. And I think speaking to the president of basketball operations, president of the organization, and some of the players and coaches, that's all they wanted. Look, don't mitigate what we've already done over 65 games. Give us a chance to earn it, and they still feel like they have that.
Out of the 5 teams, Mike, that the Grizzlies are going against for that 8th spot, Portland, New Orleans, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
Portland was almost in the NBA Finals last year. They couldn't beat Golden State. Who is the toughest competition for Memphis to get that 8th seed? Everyone
around here seems to look at New Orleans. New Orleans beat the Grizzlies twice, and one time they beat them pretty badly. And, they played well against the Grizzlies. Just for whatever reason, they shot the ball extremely well from three-point range, and that was without Zion Williamson. And then when Zion played him, he bludgeoned them inside. But to me, I think Sacramento was the most dangerous team potentially because I think the way that they were playing and the fact that Ja sort of had a difficult time, with De'Aaron Fox at that point guard position. And if you can neutralize Ja, you can pretty much feel good about how you're going to play the rest of the Grizzlies. And that was the one guy that really has given, Ja some problems. So I think Sacramento was the dark horse, most uncomfortable potential opponent for the Grizzlies. But all 4 of those teams, you just never know. If San Antonio is motivated, they got the veteran leadership still. Obviously Portland has veterans and Dame Lillard and all those guys who've been in the playoffs before. And then you have relative newcomers with New Orleans playing well and Sacramento being that team that's, like I said, the dark horse in terms of their talent.
If they're setting this up where the next 8 games were the next 8 games, it's going to be Portland, Utah, San Antonio out of the gate. And we're in the business of picking winners, Mike. It's very important for me to know, and it's going to be like this with every team, who has been in and out of market over the last month, because obviously teams were able to work out together over the past few weeks if they were around in the same area. But there are some players, maybe Jonas Valanciunas wasn't even in the country. What are the situations going on with some of the particulars?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Jonas because he's a guy that I spoke to most recently, and he never did leave the country. He said that Lithuania is a small country, and they pretty much had COVID-19 under control from early on. So it didn't really ravage his hometown and his relatives. So he was able to stay in touch with them from afar. He stayed in the States. He got some sunshine down there with you guys, man. He was in South Florida when he wasn't in Memphis. So he was able to stay stateside. Pretty much the entire roster was able to be stateside, if not in Memphis. I know a couple of guys got out to California. A couple of guys were down in Miami. But for the most part, the core, Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, those guys stayed right here in Memphis. And locked in, and they were running alongside the outdoor parks and all that kind of stuff, so you could see them working out. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue with the roster. From what I'm hearing, I haven't been able to get to the arena and inside the building. We're working from home a lot of times, so it's a lot of Zooms and conference calls. But I think for the most part, from everything I've been able to hear, those guys are all relatively in market and have worked their way back to Memphis right now for these individual voluntary workouts.
Ja Morant had that grind with the All-Star game, and you know how rookies hit that wall right around the beginning of March. Now you figure he's going to be able to be re-energized. This is his team, but he's young point guard in a unique situation. What do you foresee him being able to do in terms of putting this team on his back as the leader?
You know, he really didn't. And we were all sort of waiting and asking him about that rookie wall. I mean, this is a kid that had only played, I think, 28 to 30 games in college last year. But at that time, he was stacking up Western Conference Rookie of the Month back to back to back, 3 straight months. And then he was starting to play well again right when March hit, right after the All-Star break. So, you know, this is a guy, he really didn't have too many deep ebbs and flows to the season. He was pretty consistent all the way through. And I think he was really ready to turn another corner, especially getting Jaren Jackson Jr. back. And then he was going to look forward to working with the Justice Winslow, a forward that can help Ja get off the ball a little bit some too. So this was one of those things where I don't think he really hit the rookie wall. I think now these guys are going to be looking at this as an extended sophomore season now. They felt like they played their rookie season already. Now they're NBA veterans coming back into this campus environment in Orlando, and they're going to be looking forward to it, especially him.
Mike, looking at the top of the Western Conference, and the Lakers right now have a 5.5 game lead over the Clippers. And, you know, you covered LeBron in Miami for several years. And LeBron, after having a tough first year with the Lakers, now he's got them as the number 1 seed in the West. And part of it is, you always hear this, that LeBron has 3 titles. If it wasn't for Kyrie Irving and Ray Allen, he could have 1 title. So everyone wants to put those asterisks on it. What about this time? LeBron wins a championship in Orlando, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. How do you think the Lakers are approaching this whole thing now, trying to restart it?
Well, I always say this too, man, Kevin. When people mention the asterisk, you think back to '99 when the Spurs won it in the lockout shortened season. You go back to 2011 when Dallas won it in the 66-game regular season. I don't remember seeing an asterisk anywhere. Number one, who's still printing books and leaflets and newspapers to even put an asterisk on something? And thirdly, who reads the fine print anymore anyway in anything? So, even if you have an asterisk there, it has to be an asterisk with some information below that. And nobody reads the fine print, man. 20 years from now, we won't even really be thinking about how this season played out to that degree in terms of eliminating who won or discounting who won the championship. If the Lakers win it, if a team that we expected to win it coming in wins it, we're going to just move on. Now, if something wild and absolutely crazy happens and you get Orlando winning it all, or, a 7 for 8 seed winning it all or something like that, the Grizzlies, that would shock the world for the most part. Then you can underscore it a little bit and it might have its own documentary down the line. But if there are games to be played, these guys are going to be playing it. 65 games were played already. And this format is definitely unique and different. But I still think if you're going to have best of 7 series, you're still going to have a quality playoff format and may the best team win.
Yeah, I was about to say that, Mike, that this isn't March Madness where you could have Orlando and Sacramento in the finals because they just go on a run. You got to win 4-4-4 just to get to the finals. That's asking a lot. What about the lack of home court advantage, though?
Yes.
And I know that this is a question for everyone and no one has the answer, but what would you say about the lack of home court for all these teams?
I think that's the one thing that makes this challenging and difficult, because when you say, hey, give me what I've earned all season, the Lakers do have a point. The top 4 teams in the West do have a gripe with that. And the top 4 teams in the East, for that matter, too. There was still a lot to be played for. So what is the incentive now? So now I'm looking at, okay, I know the teams in the bottom half of the 22 are still fighting for their playoff life in terms of making it in for the most part. But what is the incentive for a top 4 team to finish first, second, third, or fourth in that situation? You're still going to play in the same arena. You're still going to live in the same, hotel. You just have to show up and win. And that's why I wonder, is the league going to implement punishments and rules and regulations for resting certain guys at this point? If there's nothing for LeBron James to play for, especially with no fans and no movement in terms of home court advantage, why would he play all 8 games and maybe he wants to play 4 and go in extra healthy? Those are all things I want to see what comes out of the rest of this format as it develops.
Twitter will find a way to put that asterisk in there.
And here's the other thing. Yeah, they will. Here's the other question I have for you guys, because I haven't been able to find this out yet. What if there are multiple teams tied for the 9th seed with, just like it is right now? You got 3 teams in the West all tied for what will be the 9th spot. If it ends in a tie, how do you do the play-in? Because it's not just a 2-team play-in. How do you do a multiple-team play-in if that's the case?
I think, Mike, there's got to be some kind of tie. They're not doing 2 separate ones. It's 8 versus 9 end of story. So if you had 3 teams going for the 9, some way there's got to be a tiebreaker with that number 9. And I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the 9 has got to beat the 8 twice. The 8's got to beat the 9 once. So that's, if the Grizzlies stay there, that works out. You have 2 shots for 1 win. But I guess it's got to be, I don't remember what the tiebreaker is, but it would be interesting if you had a 3-team, if you had 3 teams tied at number 9 to try to play to get in, but they're going to have some kind of tiebreaker to make it 8 versus 9 to be done. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I don't.
But see, here's the thing, though, because let's just say they play 8 games and the standings still look exactly like they do right now. You would still have Portland, New Orleans, and Sacramento still tied, right? And they all would be within 4 games of the Grizzlies. So how do you settle that? Especially if now that you're redoing the schedule, you might not be able to have some of the same tiebreaker scenarios as before. Because now you might not get that extra game against a team that you were supposed to play 4 times. You might only have to play them 2 times or 3 times. So how do you break a multi-team tie is what I'm saying in that situation. That's going to be interesting.
That's what we do.
I would assume that they have the same tiebreaker scenarios that would go in all 82 if you can't play it in. I mean, we're going to be in a situation where the Mavericks are going to end up playing 75 games and everybody else is going to be playing less. So you got a winning percentage. And then if winning percentage is the same, I assume you figure out if it's 3 teams that are tied, a 3-team tiebreaker, and only one can survive. I doubt that they would improvise on the fly and be like, okay, well, you guys are tied now. You play, and you have to beat Memphis twice. But we're in uncharted territory, so if you tell me that that's what's going to happen, that may be what happens. Now, speaking of which, we've got 3, I think, different complexes. I was looking at their Wikipedia at the Wide World of Sports. I've obviously been out there living in Orlando, but they just added another gym. Are you aware that they're going to have these games in 3 separate facilities out there at the Wide World of Sports? Like, we're not going to have 2 games going on simultaneously within the same edifice, are we?
I believe that could be the case. I did hear as late as this afternoon that the plan could be to have multiple gyms in operation and also have as many as 5 games a day, starting early in the afternoon or late in the afternoon or early midway through the afternoon and playing through the primetime slots from that standpoint. I do think there's going to be a gym available. If there's 3, I thought there were 2, but if there's a 3rd one there, that one is going to be for workouts and potential scheduling of practices for teams that are off as an additional site there for them to use that one. So there's still some things that are coming together with that format. But I remember years ago when the NBA pre-draft camp used to be there. They just had that one big structure right there, right off the baseball fields. But they've grown since then, I'm assuming, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they actually make it work.
Do you think this is the precipice of the NBA schedule shifting to where we see the reports that they're targeting a December 1st start? I think it's a little too early. Maybe December 15th would work better for me. But ultimately, you're going to compete less with the NFL. Do you think this is what we see going forward?
I think this is it. I do. I think it's going to be and if it's not, it's going to take you a couple of years to cycle your schedule back to give you enough time to get. So maybe by 2022, 23, then it goes back to the traditional format. But I think when we see how this works out, I think this is going to be more of a natural schedule. I think it also, from a broadcast standpoint, it gives your major networks a major league sport to have going up against baseball in the dog days of the middle of the summer. And I think that's going to help too. You need another sport there to get to bridge you from the finals in June to basically football training camps and stuff and preseason games in August. If the NBA can take up another month or 2 of that, I think that's a good thing. But I also think then you get that break where you're not overlapping and you're not asking your fans to have to choose between a Thursday night basketball game and then a Saturday night football game and all of those things. So I think that'll help. I like the schedule starting in December, and we'll see. I mean, I do think it's going to ask a lot of these players to get their bodies adjusted to this. But again, this is the start of it. The NBA's talked about all of these things the last couple of years, and it's funny how this pandemic and all of this other stuff is creating an opportunity for them to try out some of these things that they've been discussing and contemplating for the last few years.
Mike, I know you mentioned it at the top, but just to go back and circle to it, obviously everybody wants sports to come back. And we've had COVID-19. We've had what happened with George Floyd and all of these, we've had all of these protests over the last week or so. A couple things on that from you. Number one, what have the protests been like in Memphis?
They've been relatively peaceful. I live right downtown, right off the river, Mississippi River. It's one of the more picturesque parks that are right behind me. It's a great gathering spot. As a matter of fact, when I go on my daily jogs and runs, the old pyramid is where my run ends and comes back. And that's where the National Guard is set up at now. And on the other side of that parking lot in the pyramid is where the sheriff deputies are set up now. So you're basically going through what amounts to a fort, like a war zone. And you're not really seeing a lot of destruction of property here in Memphis. It's been pretty peaceful. The community is coming together. You're seeing people of all backgrounds, races, and religions still enjoying the sunsets out here right behind me. So that's been a good thing. It still is painful, though, man, because no matter where you are in this country, you feel the injustice. You feel the hurt and the anger and the pain. And as I've put in my pieces the last couple of days, one of the things that we can't lose sight of as the NBA contemplates and plans this return to Orlando, the last time, and you guys will remember this, the last time the NBA was in Orlando en masse with the collective league there was 2012 for the All-Star game, All-Star weekend in 2012. That same weekend was when Trayvon Martin was gunned down right outside of Orlando in Sanford. And really, which became the case that sparked this new wave of social activism. And you guys remember this. I was in Miami at the time. I was in Orlando that night. Tony, I saw you there. We were in the press room together, and then I came back and went back to Miami. And Kevin, you know this, Trayvon was from Miami. You know what I mean? His family was there. I got a chance to talk to Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin during that time. I remember the heat. I wrote the ESPN national story when they broke out the hoodies and did the protest from that standpoint with a silent protest with the hoodies. So if the NBA is going to resume in the midst of all of these things that we're going through, I think it would be absolutely prudent for Adam Silver, as he acknowledged in his statement today, that they're not moving forward without this being on their heart, without this being on their mind. And they're going to be returning to a place where basically this new wave of social activism started. So to acknowledge it in some kind of respectful way will be absolutely fantastic. And it'll be a good first step to continuing that conversation.
Mike, we know the Grizzlies are a very young team. This isn't the veteran team they had from years ago, and it's led by Moran. Has there been any of the young guys that have stepped up during this situation in Memphis?
Yeah, I mean, all the young guys. I mean, who isn't young on this roster? I mean, I think it's 7 guys on the roster are between 20 and 24. The rotation is Dylan Brooks, who's early 20s. Moran, as you mentioned, Jaren Jackson is 20. Brandon Clark is 23. DeAnthony Melton is 22. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Tyus Jones is 24, and he's an elder statesman. So you have a lot of guys, a lot of young guys that are bringing energy to this rotation. And then you're supplementing those guys with some Justice Winslow, still early 20s. But then you bring in a guy like a Jonas Valanciunas, and you back him up with a Gorgie Jane. You have some veteran voices there that help as well. But this is a young team that's ahead of the curve. And they feel like, it's not they're going to approach this like it's gravy, because now they're hungry to win. But this is a team that found out pretty early on how special it can be. And now they want to build and fast track this process.
And we know that there's going to be rigorous testing for all these players, probably daily. What are your thoughts on players and coaches being able to roam freely as they're supposed to, but obviously having to be cautious? And then Korean baseball, I think if one player tests positive, the whole league is going to be shut down for 3 weeks. NBA is going to treat them case by case. What are your thoughts on that? And the fact that the whole NBA is coming here in the thick of hurricane season?
Oh, man, that's the other thing. The thick of hurricane season, a surge in COVID cases in Florida, the unrest that's been out there, and really, I hadn't seen this, and you guys can correct me and update me on this, but I also, MLS was still also talking about using Orlando as well. You could potentially have 2 leagues converging, or at least that's what the early talks were. If you're going to have all of that, then this place has to be airtight when it comes to safety and testing and security and all of those things. The good thing about Disney is that we've all been there. We all know how expansive and wide and how much space there is. It's a city all unto itself, basically. So players will be able to get out and do outdoor activities, outdoor eating and things of that nature, golfing. They'll be able to have some family members, from what I understand, eventually come as they stay there for a little bit longer. So I just hope that the testing and whatever program they have for it is going to be surefire proof and concise, and that you don't have a breakout. But I do want to see what happens if this person tests positive. How much do you have to shut down of the roster and the rotation? What happens from that standpoint? So I'm looking forward to seeing that and how that works out.
Mike, final thing before we let you go. We'll end on this note. What did you think of The Last Dance?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was Jordan, the gospel according to Jordan. I can see why the criticism came out sort of the way it did. I didn't think that it made his teammates look as bad as some of the backlash was. Scottie was going to be sensitive no matter what. But I think if you're going to give Jordan the opportunity and he's worthy of getting this opportunity to control it, it came out the way I expected it. And I think it was Jordan saying, hey, listen, man, this was an extension of my Hall of Fame speech. You know what I'm saying? Now you're going to see exactly why I was the way I was. And if you think that this league is about Kobe or LeBron or Steph or KD or James Harden, think again. I'm the man. I'm the reason why you're wearing shoes from a player you probably never saw play in person, still in this generation. And this is the reason why. And Jordan had his get off my lawn moment. And that's why he's the greatest of all time, man. And there's no disrespect to anybody else who played against him or with him or came after him. But for me, he's still the number one guy on that list.
Still the best player in the world at 50, whatever he is. Right now, he can go beat anybody.
Yeah.
Mike Wallace, always great work. He's covered the NBA for well over a decade in Miami for ESPN with the Heat, and now the Memphis Grizzlies for Grind City Media, also part of their radio broadcast as well. Memphis, the number 8 seed currently. We'll see what happens when the season restarts coming up July 31st. Mike, we appreciate the time. My Mike Check is your Twitter handle, right?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. My Mike Check, Mike Wallace, always great work. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, guys, thanks a lot for having me, man. Glad to be on with you.
Our thanks to Mike Wallace for joining us there to give us a breakdown of the Grizzlies, right now the number 8 seed in the Western Conference. And Tony, 5 teams chasing Memphis, as we mentioned earlier with Mike: Portland, New Orleans, Sacramento, San Antonio, and Phoenix. Phoenix is the longest shot of all. There's 6 back with 8 to go, so we can't assume they're going to get in unless everyone else melts down. But Portland is very interesting here because right now the Blazers are sitting at 210-1 odds to win the NBA Finals. And for them just to get into this playoff, they have to erase a 3.5 game deficit from Memphis. And if everyone's healthy on the Blazers, I don't see why they couldn't make that jump. This is a team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year. And if they drew the Lakers in the first round, that could be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it becomes a race to the 9 seed, and then you figure that they'll end up within 4 games of the 8-seeded Grizzlies, if that's what goes to form, and then you have to beat them twice. And if you got Yusuf Nurkic and Zach Collins back in the lineup and Hassan Whiteside playing well, you can probably depend on Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum to show up post-hiatus. So, yeah, they're a team to watch, absolutely. I think the Pelicans are too. I'm really curious to see what kind of shape Zion Williamson's in because the talent around them can definitely make a run here, even though their schedule is going to be very tough.
Right now, the Lakers are the 1 seed. The Clippers are 2. Denver at 3, Utah 4, Oklahoma City 5, Houston 6. Those teams have clinched playoff spots. Dallas is just about in. They have a 7-game lead over Memphis, so Dallas is on the edge of getting into the playoffs. But the other thing that's interesting here, Tony, is we got to assume the Lakers will get the 1 unless they totally fall apart. But that 2 through 6 right now, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Thunder, Rockets, that can change a lot over that next 8 games because the Clippers right now have just a 4-game lead over the Rockets.
Yeah, and it becomes who don't you want to see? Because there are some teams that aren't going to want to see a Rudy Gobert and the Utah Jazz. I think Denver doesn't scare anybody. I think you believe that as talented a player as Nikola Jokic is, you can beat them running up and down the court, although the rumor is he has abs. I think the Nuggets, one of their front office guys said, he's in such great shape, he's got beach abs. So we'll see how Nikola Jokic looks as this gets started. We're still 6 weeks away, but we're going to be able to get footage when this camp situation starts in a month's time, a little more than a month. July 9th to 11th is the window that they're giving to when teams will report to Orlando. But I'm most afraid of Houston. I think if James Harden, who I have seen footage of, looks as good as he does, looks to be in shape, Russell Westbrook, you know what can you depend on from him from an energy standpoint? The fact that they did not have to play an 82-game schedule and come down the stretch with guys playing major minutes makes them the big winners out of this NBA reset.
It feels like the load maintenance conversation with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and the Clippers that it worked out very well for them, that Kawhi is well rested. And this is a team that, again, we talk about seedings because home court means nothing. So really, if you're the Clippers and you're the 2 or you're the 3, it doesn't make a difference because you're playing that other team in the second round, assuming you get through the first round. And right now, the Clippers would face the Mavericks in that 2-7. If you fall to 3, you can get the Rockets, you can get the Thunder. So that's where the seeding obviously is very important, but all that home court stuff, it just gets thrown out the window.
Right. And, when you are asked who's your finals now, because we'll get that question over the next 6 weeks, does it revert to what you had all along? For me, it does. I'm going to stick with the Clippers and the Bucks. But I no longer believe in the Bucks that much due to the lack of a home court advantage. And the Clippers, I think, do get a benefit here in that they'll have more time for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to get acclimated to one another and coexist really in a nice way where they'll be the top 1-2 two-way players in the league.
Looking at the Eastern Conference, we've talked a lot about the West, not really about the East. And Milwaukee at 53-12, I think they get hurt too just because of the momentum dying by having this stoppage for all this time that Milwaukee was rolling along. This is a team too, and I understand that they've been dominating the entire season, but only one team left from their division. Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, all teams are way out of it. I mean, they've cleaned up against them, so you're not facing those teams anymore. And their only division loss came against Indiana before the All-Star break. Again, Giannis didn't even play. But Milwaukee with that 6.5-game lead over Toronto, a team that knocked them out last year in the Eastern Conference Finals. You still have a good Boston team. The Heat, if they can just hit their shots, that they'll be hanging around. Here's a team I want to bring up to you, Tony. What about Philadelphia? Do you think now that Philadelphia has had a bit of a break, as everyone else has, that Philadelphia could now maybe make that run in the situation?
Absolutely. I think Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid were both really banged up at the time we hit pause. So to have them get 4 months off, essentially the whole off season to work on their games and work on being healthy going into this, on talent alone, I think that's why they were one of the top teams odds-wise in the Eastern Conference. Then they fell back to 6th. Odds makers and bettors really soured on them because Ben Simmons can't hit a jump shot, because it didn't look like they were playing together and there was a lot of bickering. So now, hitting the reset button there, although I don't think it makes Brett Brown a better coach, I think certainly does enhance their chances.
Right now, the Lakers and Bucks each at 5-2 odds at DraftKings to win the NBA Finals. The Clippers right behind at 33-10, and then the Rockets at 12-1. And we'll see what the Rockets can do. Then Boston at 20-1, Toronto at 24-1, Denver 25-1, the Heat and Sixers at 27-1, Utah interesting at 29-1. Even Brooklyn moved all the way up to 60-1. But we're not going to see Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving, so it's going to be hard to think that Brooklyn is going to make this kind of jump to win the whole thing.
I agree. I think that there were some people when odds were initially put out and were still available as this over the past few months, wanted to take a plunge with the Nets in the event that Kevin Durant would come back and Kyrie Irving would be healthy enough to play. Doesn't look like that's what's going to happen. They'll probably both pack it in until the December restart, which makes anybody who got in on the Nets in the hopes of a lottery ticket a big loser unless they change their minds and play in August.
One quick note on KD, that he kind of lucked out a bit with the season getting pushed back to December next season, that at least he's got a few more months. He could be ready by October, but now you have about 6 more weeks that at least now he'll be 100% ready for next season.
Right. And I mean, I think those guys, they envisioned playing together. It didn't look like Kyrie Irving's heart was ever into it this year. This is Spencer Dinwiddie's team until, somebody gives him enough Bitcoin to jump forces somewhere else. But he's going to be the driving force on Nets team that's probably going to go out in the first round, but I do think they hang on to their playoff spot. What do you make of the Wizards? Do you think that if John Wall doesn't come back and play, they have any shot?
It's hard. I mean, you're 5.5 back with 8 to go behind the Magic. And assuming Washington wins out and either Brooklyn or Orlando totally falls apart, that we got to think that Brooklyn or Orlando are in. I don't know about seeding. It could flip just because the Magic are a half game behind the Nets. But for Washington, I just can't see it. I really can't see how they could make up all of that. And you're asking Bradley Beal to carry everything. That's what he did. He had those back-to-back 50-point games earlier in the season. They just don't have the support. That's the issue with Washington. You know, it's one thing when you have John Wall and Bradley Beal in the lineup, but there's just not enough around them. And if they were 3 back, I'd say maybe. But to ask for 5.5 back, that's really too much, I think. I'm not putting anything out there that is so brilliant, but there's no way Washington's getting into this. There's no way. And I know the NBA tried to keep these teams, have a few more teams play, but Washington, they had nothing to play. They're not going to make up that 5.5 game deficit.
Who's your number 2 in the East? I mean, at this point, there's no value in the Bucks if you're getting in right now. So the value would come into who beats the Bucks now without a home court advantage in play in the Eastern Conference. I still like both LA teams in the West, but I'm open-minded in the East. Who do you like the most?
I take a shot with the Celtics, and I know at 20-1, it's not like you're not getting 100-1 odds with them, and the Celtics have better odds than Toronto. I just can't see Toronto without Kawhi Leonard doing it again this year, and the Raptors did catch the Warriors beat up. And I don't want to take away from Toronto. That was a great run they made to win the championship. They still were down 2-0 in Milwaukee. They still faced a Golden State team that was all beat up in the end. And I can't see Toronto doing it. I don't have enough faith in the Heat, really, to carry it. And Indiana, I don't have faith in Indiana. I can't trust the Sixers. I think Boston is the only one where now that Kyrie is gone, I think the Celtics have kind of restarted things a bit. And he probably wasn't the guy. But at 43-21, still a pretty solid record. They're 1 game behind the Clippers if you look at the standings like that. The Clippers are 44-20. The Celtics are 43-21. So it's just because Milwaukee's had such a great run this year why Boston's so far back. But the Celtics are still a very good team. They're leading their division. I got to go with them. It's not a dark horse necessarily, but you asked the number 2 team. I'm going to go with them as the ones that could possibly knock the Bucks off.
Yeah, they were playing a lot of small ball, didn't have Dennis Kanter ready after losing Al Horford in free agency. So I think they'll have to reinvent themselves slightly. But if Jason Tatum can pick up where he left off, Jaylen Brown too, I like them more than the Sixers. Unless Ben Simmons comes out with a refined mentality, taking shots, and I doubt that happens in a setting where he'll be adjusting to new courts. I just don't see their problems going away of not being able to space the floor.
Yeah, Philadelphia, again, I don't trust them just because of the way they're made up. And, they're a team that could get through the first round, but again, they have to get over the hump and we're waiting for it. And yeah, Kawhi Leonard doesn't hit that crazy shot last year. That game goes to overtime. Maybe Philadelphia beats them and they advance, but I don't know, something about the Sixers I just don't buy into. And they're a team that right now would draw the Celtics in the first round. A lot can change during this 8 games, but that'll be probably, when you look at it, the most entertaining series if we're just saying seedings at this moment. Because when you look at the West and Clippers, Mavericks, the Clippers kind of had their way with the Mavs this year. Denver, Houston could be interesting. Utah, OKC, I feel like they always draw each other in the playoffs, but that's a kind of a toss-up series. But you get Boston, Philly in the first round would be really good. I got to believe the Heat can knock the Pacers out in the first round, but then you would get Milwaukee in the second round. And I know they beat Milwaukee way early in the season as huge underdogs, but that would be a major upset in my mind if the Heat beat the Bucks 4 times.
No, agreed. But it does set up for, you figure Milwaukee has a walkover in its first round series. If there's an injury or if they're not playing well, the Pacers and the Heat both have the depth to potentially pull an upset if Giannis isn't playing to an MVP level. I mean, I think that's the key in the East because you take away that huge home court advantage. Giannis is still the best player in the league at this point, not by leaps and bounds, but essentially he has had the most impact. He's going to have to continue at that level in a new environment for the Bucks to be as effective a favorite as they have been.
Well, looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. 88 regular season games in Orlando. and then we'll start the playoffs. It all begins July 31st. It's over a 16-day span, apparently, these regular season games. So they'll start the playoffs in mid-August. And, yeah, it's going up against preseason football and then eventually the NFL and college football if it comes back. But this will be definitely a lot of fun. And the NHL also begins around that time. So after this long layoff, we're going to be very busy with the NBA and with the NHL. Don't forget that you could check out the podcast on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Play, iHeartRadio. You could find it at all these different outlets, also on YouTube on our Vegas Insider channel. Our thanks to Mike Wallace for joining us from Grind City Media to talk Grizzlies and NBA during the show. My thanks, of course, as always, to Tony Mejia. I am Kevin Rogers. We will talk to you again next week for the Bet and Collect podcast right here on VegasInsider.com.